Welcome to the 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, and today I'll be talking with Rabbi Yitz Greenberg about his latest book, The Triumph of Life, a narrative theology of Judaism. As Hanukkah approaches, it reminds us that even a small light can transform the darkness. In this episode, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg reflects on how we might use our power in ways that kindle life, hope, and renewal.
I think the Torah dreamt of being a guide to the whole world, not just the Jewish people. It doesn't start with the first chapter of the story of Abraham, the first Jew. The Torah starts with the creation of the world. And I think its dream remains to guide not just the Jewish people, but the whole world to a fully repaired world.
Rabbi Greenberg has had a long and notable career in service of the Jewish people. As Professor Stephen T. Katz wrote, no Jewish thinker has had a greater impact on the American Jewish community in the last 2 decades than Irving Yitz Greenberg. He received his smicha, ordination, in 1953 and has a master's and PhD in American history from Harvard. He has served in numerous rabbinic and academic positions. Together with Elie Wiesel, he founded CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. He also served as founding president of Jewish Life Network Steinhardt Foundation, which created such programs as Birthright Israel and the Partnership for Excellence in Jewish Education. When Elie Wiesel served as chairman of the President's Commission on the Holocaust, Rabbi Greenberg served as its executive director. He is a leading Jewish thinker and the author of 5 books. He has written extensively on post-Holocaust Jewish religious thought, Jewish-Christian relations, pluralism, and the ethics of Jewish power. He is married to the Orthodox Jewish feminist pioneer and writer, Blu Greenberg. In this episode, we'll talk about Rabbi Greenberg's path to becoming ordained as a rabbi at an unconventional yeshiva and his first experience of their dancing and chanting nigunim, wordless melodies, as a means of internalizing Jewish concepts.
When it was finished, I turned to my father and said, I'm going here. I had no idea what I was getting into. But I had never had that kind of experience before. You know, it's like when Sally meets Harry, you have this scene where this woman reenacts an orgasm and he says, I'll order that. So, well, that was my reaction here.
And we'll also discuss how Rabbi Greenberg understands the messianic intent of tikkun olam, or repairing the world.
That means to me that our task in repairing the world is to overcome Alzheimer's, which robs people of their uniqueness, to overcome sexism and racism, which denies people's equality. Don't accept the status quo, but transform it.
All that and more coming up next. Welcome to the 5 Books, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. It is such an honor and a privilege to have you here. I just want to say how much I loved reading The Triumph of Life, a narrative theology of Judaism. It's so readable, like really compulsively readable. And at the same time, it gives people direct access to the big ideas of Judaism in a way that's grounded in tradition, but totally accessible. I just encourage everyone to read it. It feels like a book for anyone who wants to engage deeply, whether they've studied a lot or are just starting out. It's full of wisdom, but also heart. It offers a direct and generous path into Judaism that affirms life, dignity, and human partnership with God. And it's written with clarity and urgency. So I'm so happy to have this conversation, and I hope everyone will read it and engage with its ideas.
Thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction. I think I should quit now when I'm still ahead, but thank you.
Terrific. So to start, I just would love to know, you've had a full career in academia as a public figure, public rabbi. What compelled you to write this theological narrative now?
I think the deepest reason is that I do feel we're living in the most remarkable moment of Jewish history. In the book, I argue a new iteration of the tradition is being born. But even more important, I think this is the heroic age of the Jewish people. Namely, the whole world, but the Jewish people in particular, came to realize we're living in a world where you have to take power. Our failure to have power during the Holocaust is what left Jewry so vulnerable, no country of haven, no army to protect us. The whole Jewish people woke up as indeed the whole world did after the Holocaust, that there's so much power available in this world to evil people that if you are vulnerable or a potential object, you have to be strong enough to defend yourself. So the Jewish people expressed this in the creation of State of Israel, in the bringing to a living political culture, American and diaspora Jewry, just as after the World War, the anti-imperial colonial revolution in the Third World, or women's liberation, or African-American liberation, or gay liberation. These are all responses to taking up the challenge of taking power because you're so vulnerable. So if you believe in life, if you believe in values, if you believe in dignity, then you have to take power. But of course, A, it's hard to take power, and B, it's risky that it leads to new corruption or new evil on the part of the good people. So that's the moment of challenge, and I really wrote this book in part to give a kind of a narrative and show how the Jewish vision of repairing the world and achieving a world of human dignity and peace and justice needed the Jewish people to take up power and see how it's doing in actual practice. So the book was written not just to be a theology of Judaism, but I was hoping a kind of a narrative to guide Jews of every background.
I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, host of the Five Books podcast. This year, we're celebrating the centennial of National Jewish Book Month with our partners at the Jewish Book Council. We're looking ahead to the next 100 years and asking, what Jewish book do you hope people are still reading in 2125? Now more than ever, it matters to create space for Jewish authors and stories. Your listening lifts up their voices and helps carry Jewish literature forward. Tell us your picks on Instagram at 5bookspod and discover what books the people you admire are choosing. Let's build the next 100 years of reading Jewish books together. Hey, I wanted to tell you about a new podcast I've been listening to that I think you'll love called Thoughts and Prayers from the Shalom Hartman Institute. It's hosted by Jessica Fisher, and it's a moving exploration of Jewish prayer and why it matters in modern life. Each episode weaves together personal stories, ancient texts, and conversations with thinkers and rabbis like Ilana Steinhain, Yessi Klein Halevi, Lauren Holtzblatt, and Yehuda Kurtzer, and more. They're wrestling with what it means to pray in our modern world. It's beautifully produced, deeply personal, and full of the kinds of questions that stay with you long after you've listened. If you're curious about spirituality, community, or what prayer means today, check out Thoughts and Prayers from the Shalom Hartman Institute, available wherever you get your podcasts. Book 1, A Jewish Book from Childhood. Masechet Megillah, the tractate of the Talmud that details the laws of the holiday of Purim. In this section, Rabbi Greenberg also discusses coming to study in an American offshoot of a yeshiva rooted in the Lithuanian Musar movement, which was about learning Torah for the purpose of character building and spiritual evolution. Musar yeshivas were known for devoting time to emphasize ethics and scrupulous personal and religious behavior, but also for their distinctive spiritual disciplines, like meditative prayer and the chanting of nigunim, or wordless melodies, often accompanied by dance as a form of devotion.
My father was in Europe, in Poland, was an orphan in a very poor family. His father died when he was 5 or 6. By the age of 8 or 9, he had 3 other sisters. He was the youngest, and his mother could not support him, literally, and therefore she sent him away to yeshiva that were just beginning to be born, and yeshiva would take an 8, 9, 10-year-old boy in if he was brilliant enough, and my father was brilliant. They would waive tuition and provide a home, shelter, and food. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, was that they were not really organized, and they didn't really have solid cafeterias and 3 meals a day. So in the end, they depended, and he depended, on families inviting you to dinner. And frankly, if they did, you ate that week, and if they didn't, you went hungry. My father, because of his wits and his learning of Talmud, got into these yeshivot, and secondly, by his ability to entertain and express these stories, learning with families, was able to get invitations. So he literally sang for his dinner or the equivalent. He grew up, and of course, he came to America. He loved Talmud, and he taught Talmud. It was called Chaver Shas in those days. My father never learned the experience of being in a family, talking with children, hanging out, or going to play basketball with them. So the truth is, he struggled. He was a loving parent. He didn't know how to talk to his children or have the kind of day-to-day family experiences. But what he did is, I realized after a while, he would, if he wanted to express his love, he'd sit you down and study Talmud with you. With my sisters too, by the way. He was ahead of his time, not just with me and my brother. But it's a very remarkable experience to kind of be made love with by somebody by teaching you some Talmud. And I always had a very strong emotional, positive feeling about studying Talmud because, as I said, it was not just an intellectual religious experience, it was really a relational and love experience. When I was 11 or 12, I was in the highest class in elementary yeshiva. We had a teacher named Rabbi Greenberg who loved to teach Talmud, who was an excellent teacher. And so in the summer, as a volunteer basis, he announced he's going to teach Talmud for anybody who wants to come. And in the summer, he wanted to get something that would be achievable in a short period. So he picked, among others, Megillah, this tractate, because it was like 20-plus pages and could be covered in a few weeks' study. And I studied with him, and that sort of launched my career of learning rabbinic texts. As I said, it's not a standard children's book, but it became a very powerful emotional experience.
Would you mind just sort of taking us through your educational background?
Well, I'm a classic modern Orthodox Jew. I was born, my parents were Orthodox, obviously observant from Europe, but they were profoundly influenced by being immigrants. Their greatest dream was their American children should become all American. My father, who was a really superb teacher and speaker, only in Yiddish. He never commanded English as he would have liked to. And as a result, he became the rabbi of the Chaver Shas of the Talmud study group in Bethel, which was the richest and fanciest Orthodox shul in Borough Park in those days. But he was downstairs teaching Chaver Shas and getting very minuscule pay, whereas the English-speaking rabbi was upstairs, and he was a big rabbi and well-paid. So his imagination always was that his children should become all American and become, maybe an American rabbi or academic or something that would give them the dignity and the importance of an American profession. So I had that internalized, and I was planning to be an academic, not a rabbi. And I went through modern Orthodox schools. When I went to college, I was planning to go to Yeshiva University, which was the next logical level college of the modern Orthodox path. But my father had, in the meantime, met the Space Yosef. It was a group of refugees. It was refugee yeshiva, maybe 40, 50 men altogether. Half of them had survived the concentration camps. Half had survived Siberian slave labor. They were an offshoot of a so-called Musar movement, the movement that focused in 19th and 20th century Europe on creating character, developing human responsibility, that the key to the Torah was not just observance or even intellectual learning, but building character, developing kindness, developing selflessness, and minimizing of ego. And since they had people with this incredibly intense background and survived the camps together, either type of camp, they were ambivalent about bringing Americans. But one day the Rosh Yeshiva happened to mention to my father, they're thinking of taking in Americans. Would I be interested? He asked me, I said, I had no idea. My father said to me, I said, what do you think? He says to me, look, I'm not so crazy about their Musar, their idea of character and focus and so on. I mean, He said, I'm interested in the intellectual side. They're really high level. If you go there, you'll get a high-quality Talmud experience, which is my criteria for good school. But why don't you take a look at it and try it out? Well, so we decided we'll do that. And what happened was, I had no idea what I'm getting into. I went at night with my father. We were sitting there learning. Everybody's learning. What I didn't know was 15 minutes before Ma'ariv, before the evening prayer, I hear someone gives a bang on the desk, and suddenly the whole place falls quiet. I realize that my father and I are the only two people still talking, and everybody else is quiet. Suddenly I stop, I look around. At the table opposite me, the fellow sitting there jumps up, and at the top of his lungs starts to cry, Hakina kavod, jealousy, lust, and the search for honor take a person out of this world or ruin their world. And he starts to sing this. It's a verse from Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. And for the next 15 minutes, he is dancing, singing, chanting this verse. And a minute later, at the other table, someone jumps up, and suddenly the whole room is a cacophony. People are chanting verses from the Torah, verses from the rabbis, most of them about person and self. There was this tradition, which I was completely unaware of, that they studied intellectually the rules of character and personal development, but every night, 15 minutes before Ma'ariv, they would try what they call bespilus, to do it with emotion and enthusiasm. And so for 15 minutes you had tens of people crying, dancing, singing, jumping, clapping, cheering. I mean, I was sitting there totally stunned, overwhelmed, really. It was like a storm. When it was finished, I turned to my father and said, I'm going here. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I had never had that kind of experience before. It's like when Sally meets Harry, you have this scene where this woman reenacts an orgasm and he says, I'll order that. So, well, that was my reaction here. I want to have something like that. It was just unbelievable. So I ended up going there for several years. For the entire years of my college career, it was 4 years. And the truth is, they drilled into me first of all, character development, self-critique. They had all kinds of activities. How to measure yourself. They had mashgiach. I became the closest to the rabbi who did a personal guidance, self-analysis, critique of you every week or two. It'd sit with you. And they had all kinds of activities of self-critique and of group study together and of dealing with these personal issues. It was very moving and very powerful experience. And of course, I was totally beguiled by them. They had gone through hell, but one result was that they had worked out their character. They had people of kindness, patience, unlimited. They had a sense of presence, divine presence. God is with you. And not least, they had this tradition from Europe already that the most important way of spending your life is to bring Torah to the masses. In Europe, they required all their graduates, when they finished, to go out and organize an elementary school. And in fact, they had some 60 to 80 such schools in Poland, which the Nazis came in and destroyed before World War II. So I think that left a permanent impression. But long and short stories, despite all these amazing things, they did not knock out my vision of becoming all-American and academic. So in my fourth year, I told them, I am going to go on to graduate school. And I applied to Harvard mainly because that was my family and my vision of, that was all-America, Harvard. But in so doing, they said to me, you're sure? Because we'd love you to continue and you can get smicha. I said, I wasn't planning to be a rabbi. I said, no. They said, in our system, there are exams. But if you are able to pass these exams, you can get ordination. I said to myself, what have I got to lose? I've already done. And the truth is, I ended up spending maybe another 3 or 4 months and study intensively and pass these exams. And I was able to pass the exams and get smicha, having no plan to do anything with it. It's a joke in the family. Blu one time said to me, I tricked her into marrying, because she had told me she doesn't plan to marry a rabbi. Her father had gotten smicha from Yeshiva University, but he was a businessman, and that was her image of how a religious person should be. You be a good, honest businessman, not to practice the rabbinate. And I had the same intentions. I kept being academic. And what happened was in 1961, my whole life changed because I encountered the Holocaust and decided that I would end up serving the Jewish people. But if I wouldn't have had the smicha at Beis Yosef, I wouldn't have had smicha. I couldn't have become a rabbi or any of the later steps that really shaped my life. So looking back, I had this double luck. One, that it really had a profound religious impact upon me, including the idea of Torah, teaching people Torah as a life calling, but also a real sense of God's presence, and most of all, an emphasis that Judaism is about human development, character. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, the founder, who had a profound effect on the movement and on me, once said the whole Torah came, and the whole purpose of Jewish religious living is to make every individual into a mensch, kind, responsible, mature, loving, ethical. So I had that good fortune of that, and as a kind of a bonus, to be ordained in a way that it made it possibly later to make this a life career.
Book 2, A Book from Adulthood, The Works of Nathaniel Hawthorne and Halachic Man by Joseph B. Soloveitchik. In this section, we discuss Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's discovery of Nathaniel Hawthorne as a student at Brooklyn College and reading Halachic Man while a graduate student at Harvard. Rabbi Greenberg became a student and disciple of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, known as the Rav, a seminal figure of American Orthodox Judaism.
In college, I think the book that had the most influence on me religiously was not written by a Jew, actually. It was Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of the great American authors. I really fell in love with Hawthorne in college years and read everything. There was a modern library edition of all his novels and many or most of his short stories. The reason is that Hawthorne, of course, grew out of the Puritan tradition, the Protestant, deeply religious evangelical tradition. However, over the course of a couple of centuries, particularly in the Northeast, it went through a series of reform and became more and more secularized and more, you might say, modernized than the original. The profundity in Hawthorne was that, in effect, Hawthorne said, the formal religious language or practice may be eroded, but the deeper issues, meaning life, is there a power beyond human? What is the relationship of the individual and the value system? What's the relationship of the individual and community? That these issues, according to Hawthorne, and he explores this in his book, continue to haunt people. They continue to plague, if you will, people. And I was fascinated by it, and to this day I think it had a profound influence on my idea, which is strong in the book, that God becomes more and more hidden, and that we're living in an age where God is totally hidden, but the divine is present if you dig deeply enough. And the way Hawthorne pioneered my seeing this, and in his bringing out that the religious, deeper issues of religion, the internal issues, the question of divine presence or being in an uncaring and blank, frozen world, those issues remain after the formal religious claims have disappeared or weakened. And I think that had a strong influence upon me and helped me keep wrestling, despite my modern influence and my rational tendencies. It made me realize that the religious issues remain long after the surface has been cleaned out, as you get a much deeper level of religious issues. That was Hawthorne. Now, the other great influence is when I went on to graduate school in Boston, Cambridge, I came under the orbit of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. I became rabbi of the Young Israel of Brookline and became a family member of his sisters. Her name was Ann Gerber, and through her, She really introduced me very much to his home and his connection. It became a very powerful personal influence. But no less important, she gave me something which, of course, now is known as Halachic Man. He had published it in Hebrew in a very obscure journal which no one ever heard of. But she gave me this book, and some of its themes to this day are profoundly influential in my own thinking. His identification of religion with life, and he points out that in the Bible, life is the uppermost value. He had a very strong theme in Halachic Man of autonomy, creativity, that it's not just a routine or an observant structure, but on the contrary, it's supposed to be highly creative, constantly innovating and conceptualizing or reconceptualizing how you experience life itself. So many of the themes of Halachic Man became very personally shaping, and I worked with them for a whole lifetime. But I think more than ever before, in my most recent book, The Triumph of Life, these themes became sort of dominant, and I give him the credit of opening my eyes to this vision. In general, the most moving thing that blew my mind, Soloveitchik's greatness was that he saw patterns. And I say to this day, it's his exposure to get a PhD in philosophy, University of Berlin, because many great scholars of Talmud studied and knew thousands of details. His training as a philosopher made him ask the big questions, what are the great patterns? And he was able to show me that halakha is not just a set of laws and details. It is a way of looking at life. It's a conception of life. And every one of these details fits into a broader picture of how do you approach life? How do you experience God's presence? How do you shape life behaviors in light of the big picture of divine presence and of this worldly holiness? So I would say that has been the most influential book for me as an adult, I would say, in terms of directing the unfolding of my own religious thinking.
I so appreciate seeing the direct line from Hawthorne and that hiddenness, and then the paradigms and the big picture from Rav Soloveitchik. They're such so clearly through lines.
The two images were, in a way, at war with each other, the modern cultural interest and the historian, academic side of me, and the Jewish religious thinker and rabbi. What changed my life and balanced and rebalanced my whole life was in 1961. I was an academic. I got a Fulbright to go teach American intellectual history at Tel Aviv University. My wife and I always had a strong interest in Israel. We said we'd make Aliyah. We just celebrated our 68th anniversary, and before we got married, we were talking about Aliyah. So this was on our minds for many years. But I was an academic, and I was into academia, and then came to Tel Aviv. But that was the year when we exposed, I guess, the Eichmann trial and other things, sort of exposed the Jewish world to the Holocaust. And suddenly I was caught up in it. And it really was it took over my life. It was a shocking experience because for a religious, observant Jew, very happy, very fulfilled as an Orthodox Jew, suddenly seeing the horror and the cruelty and the mass murder, I really shook my belief. Is there a God? What about the Jewish teaching that life is stronger than death? What about the Jewish teaching that the world can be repaired and the forces of good will win out? Messianism, we can overcome hunger and poverty. All these ideas were profoundly shaken, if not destroyed, in encounter with the Holocaust. The opposite. Human life is not infinitely valuable, as I believed, and my teachers showed me, but because the Nazis turned Jewish life into nothing. They reduced the cost of killing continuously because their life was worth next to nothing. So it was a crisis of faith and personal, which in a way never ended, but yes, in that first couple of years. And it was that struggle, I say again, two things saved me, being in the state of Israel at the time. So it was extraordinary. I would spend the day Yad Vashem reading about these horrifying and devastating and anti-life, anti-religious realities. And then I would go out into the street to come home to our new baby, first child, Moshe, and my wife, and I'd walk the streets of Jerusalem, and I would see literally the words of Jeremiah. He said, this is when Jerusalem was totally in ruins. He said, the day will come when in the streets of the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, you will hear the sound of song and dance and laughter, the sound of joy, the sound of the bride and the groom. And lo and behold, you'd walk down the street and you'd see a wedding party dancing, or the prophets promising that the dispersed of Israel throughout the world will come home, and suddenly you walk in the streets of Jerusalem, and Jews from literally every part of the world, survivors from Arab countries, eventually from Ethiopia, walking the street, and you saw the prophecy being fulfilled in your lifetime, in your presence. Build Jerusalem again. It was building, it was expanding, it was exploding. So I was really torn. For a number of years, it was a kind of almost a schizophrenia, where half of me understood that death wins and the evil is strongest, and the Holocaust shows the emptiness and maybe the absence, if not the non-existence of God. And the other half of me said, prophecy is alive, the Jewish covenant is alive, the return of the dispersed, the renewal of Jewish life that was promised. God, the revelation, God, the Torah, the covenant is vital like never before in history. So I wrestled with that for many years. I said the main initial outcome was a decision. I'm not going to be an academic. I want to become someone who works to heal and to help the Jewish people. Eventually that led me to become a rabbi in a synagogue. It eventually led me to become a professor of Jewish studies. It led me to become a creator with Elie Wiesel of CLAL to develop Torah learning for activists in the community. So that was really the great turning points of my life. The Jewish side, the educator side, the one who said you have to bring Torah to people, won out over the academic American intellectual historian.
Book 3, A Book That Changed Your Worldview, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Rabbi Greenberg discusses the 1962 book about the history of science that changed how he thought about the study of religion. Kuhn reframes science not as an accumulation of facts, but as a puzzle-solving framework in which scientists collect evidence to fit an existing worldview, and that these worldviews, or paradigms, shift over time.
As I tried to reconcile modernity and tradition, it was a great struggle to integrate the two. Modern was science, and science was objective, and it was based on data and experimentation and on mastery of reality, whereas religion was kind of myth and hope and religious imagination, but no comparison as to the power, credibility of the two. Kuhn came along and said that's a misunderstanding of science. Science, too, is built on a paradigm as central organizing principle. It's really a narrative, and the evidence that it collects and builds on is correct, but what evidence do you collect and how do you organize it? That is shaped and reshaped by the narrative, by the paradigm, and that's where Kuhn is so influential. It sort of pointed me to looking for what paradigm, what central model guides my understanding of Jewish religion. It turned out to be Exodus, redemption, perfection of the world, messianism, which promises to overcome all the enemies of life, and the centrality of life in Jewish tradition. I believe that this helps us organize and properly sort out the data, because when you look at the data, you can see in Jewish observances, you can see things that are harsh and cruel, or things that give less than equal dignity, say, to women, or values that are hostile to gay people. So the question is this data definitive or decisive, or do you organize around the theme of the centrality of life, or the triumph of life, as I say in the book, where we believe we'd overcome poverty, we could overcome hunger, we could overcome discrimination, we could overcome inequality and injustice. We believe we can overcome war. That's part of our goals. And in fact, what the book is an attempt to say, here, if you organize Judaism, understanding, including observances, around the theme of the centrality of life, it really becomes a guide to a Judaism that is life-affirming, that's able to grow and incorporate new experiences of life, and new equality for women, and new dignity for gays, and new understanding of every human being in the world is entitled to the treatment as an image of God. So that has been, you might say, the central theme of my work in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I believe only this kind of a broad version of understanding of Judaism as a religion of life can flourish, because we're living through, again, one of the great transformational ages of human history, where every religion and every way of life is exposed to every other. In the past, it wasn't that way. Judaism lived in a shelter, in a ghetto, forced, imposed on us. But Christianity, Islam, each grew up in their own ghetto. Even as a majority, they had their own ghetto, in which they were superior and everybody else was inferior. And suddenly we're all thrown into this world together. So you can't get away with saying Christianity is inferior or goyim, because you see every day their dignity and their value. So the only form of Judaism, or any religion, in my judgment, that can survive in this new environment is a religion that's able to open up itself, to develop such distinctive values and such embrace of life that it's fully comfortable embracing life and celebrating it in its distinctive way in the presence of every other, not presented as evil or inferior or as strange, but presented as live, vital alternatives. But I choose this alternative because it's so vital and meaningful. It leads to a higher level of religion, I believe. I don't blame the Haredim for closing off. I don't blame them for trying to create a ghetto, because they understand that a version of Judaism that says we are superior and the others are inferior cannot stand up in an open environment. So I don't blame them, but I think it's a mistake. Out of protecting Judaism or helping to keep God in the center, they choose to withdraw and not integrate. I think the Torah dreamt of being a guide to the whole world, not just the Jewish people. It's not just a tribal religion. It doesn't start with the first chapter of the story of Abraham, the first Jew, or the first Jewish law of Torah, which is the 12th chapter of Exodus. The Torah starts with the creation of the world. And I think its dream remains to guide not just the Jewish people, but the whole world to a fully repaired world.
Book 4, the book you're reading now, The Art of Diplomacy by Stuart E. Eisenstadt. Stuart Eisenstadt served in prominent roles in multiple administrations and persuaded President Carter in 1978 to appoint the President's Commission on the Holocaust to determine an appropriate Holocaust memorial in the U.S. He placed Elie Wiesel as chairman of the mission and Rabbi Yitz Greenberg as executive director of the commission. Together, they established the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, and continued in those roles once the museum was formally created.
Stuart Eisenstadt has a book which explores, you might say, diplomacy, the art of diplomacy. And it's a study of America, how through diplomatic engagement has had a very powerful effect, whether it's making peace in the Middle East between Egypt and Israel, whether it's setting up international trade agreements that led to globalization, but also to a great rise in income. So it's basically a study of how diplomacy and a vision of using your soft power to influence the world and shape it can make a major contribution. If, of course, Stuart himself had a major contribution in getting reparations and getting the Swiss banks to cough up the billions of money that they had gotten from Jews who parked the money in Swiss banks and then were killed by the Nazis, and nobody can even collected it. So he's a living example, but his book is a living example of how diplomacy can make a better world or create a more peaceful resolution of great challenges.
Book 5, the author's latest book, The Triumph of Life, A Narrative Theology of Judaism by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg has written widely on post-Holocaust theology, Jewish-Christian relations, pluralism, and the ethics of Jewish power. At the heart of his thought is the idea that God's covenant with the Jewish people has unfolded in 3 stages, the third beginning after the Holocaust shattered the old framework. He famously cautioned no statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of burning children. In this third stage, God is hidden, and the onus is on the Jewish people to seek out God and partner with God to perfect the world. In an age when humanity wields unprecedented power, Greenberg argues for an ethic of power that is collaborative and dedicated to sustaining life. Can you tell us a little bit about your idea of what tikkun olam means and what this responsibility of tikkun, of repair, looks like for us currently?
Again, you can argue, but my central claim is that tikkun olam is not some modern liberal invention, or for that matter, as the scoffers often say, it's just a democratic political platform dressed up with some Jewish words or phrases. It's not. I believe tikkun olam is the contemporary articulation of messianism. People talk of a Jewish influence. We are uniquely influential in human history. It's a group that's less than 0.2% of world population. And the whole culture has been shaped by our teaching of one God. But I talk in my book about what I consider the second most influential Jewish idea, which is messianism. Don't accept the world as it is. According to the Jewish promise, messianism means that this world can be repaired. God wants it to be repaired. God has offered to join us in a partnership, breathed covenant, together to restore the world and repair it to the point where life wins out totally, where we overcome all the enemies of life. That means hunger and poverty and war and sickness. And Isaiah speaks in the Messianic age of the deaf hearing, the blind seeing, the lame dancing. That means to me that our task in repairing the world is to overcome Alzheimer's, which robs people of their uniqueness, to overcome sexism and racism, which denies people's equality, anti-Semitism, and so on. So this is, in my mind, the second most influential idea. Don't accept the status quo, but join it, transform it, and work with allies. The biggest ally we have is God, but it's not just God. It's the past generations that have started this process and on whom we build. It's our fellow allies in the non-Jewish world who want to repair the world. So Judaism says, don't settle. You can and will win out. You have God's promise. Of course, that doesn't mean it's a guarantee. You have to do your share, your hard work. So that's the theme of the book in terms of the promise of turning the world into paradise in our hands. The other big claim, original, if you will, claim in the book, is that this partnership which God enters into itself goes through stages. It's not a one-time event. And in the first stage, what I now look back and call the biblical stage, God is very much the dominant partner. And the Jews are kind of nuchschleppers. You know, they follow when they have given up and they accept slavery. God sends Moses, God smashes the Egyptians with 10 plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea. And so God pulls them and pushes them and leads them into making a homeland and getting a better society. But as the Jews grow and learn how to live covenantally, how to reconsider every aspect of life and live it with life as the primary value, God self-limit. That's what the rabbis taught me. That's what I think the rabbis taught all of us. God becomes more hidden so that humans can take responsibility. What the rabbis represent is no more prophecy. That's the message from heaven or from God in the first. In this stage, if you want to know what God wants, you have to use your mind, human mind. Study past revelation, study past texts, and then use your judgment to apply it to the present changing reality. Now, I claim in the book that that's the second stage. It's a stage where humans move to equal partnership. But I believe we're living in the third stage. God is not only hidden, but totally hidden. Not because God wants to distance, but because God wants to be closer. When God became more hidden, God moved from the temple and from a few rare places to your home, to your bedroom, to when you visit the sick in the hospital. Now I'm saying God is totally hidden means that God is everywhere. Only you have to uncover that presence, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, in justice and in dealing with your clients to discover the divine presence and the call to justice, whether you are a social worker who helps a person recover their image of God and their self-respect and their dignity. So in the third stage, humans are fully responsible. And God does more miracles than ever. I mean, I joke about it. What is the Zoom that we're on? What is my iPhone? It's a miracle. I speak, and 7,000 miles from here, someone instantly hears me. Except that this miracle is not by God overcoming nature, but human beings studied the laws of nature and the communication and transmission of sound and the power of electricity and batteries, and they create all these miracles. And medicine, I mean, people have cured. I am a beneficiary of open heart surgery who would have died of a heart attack 40 years ago. I have a pacemaker when my heart doesn't beat right. It's just, but those miracles involve partnership and full human responsibility. In fact, in the book I argue that explains, if to the extent there's an explanation, the Holocaust. Because it's not that God was absent. It's not, as I feared in my first stage, that God is not existent. Otherwise, why didn't God start this process? It's that hundreds of years ago, God had called upon humans to take responsibility, take full power, and to repair the world. And yes, the tragedy is that freedom and that call from God, the Nazis took advantage of it to create tremendous power using technology and bureaucracy and centralization of power, and they created a total extermination program of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, the Jews had no power, so they couldn't resist. They did their best, but they, in the end, were destroyed. And the Allies, who had power to stop the Nazis, they eventually did, but they didn't use that power to save the Jews. But when the Jewish people awoke and realized this is so, they have to take power. This is the third stage of the covenant, where we are the managing partners on behalf of God, where the Jewish people is a lead partner. We're not the only, but we can't save the whole world alone. But in partnership with Christians, with Hindus, with other groups, secular groups that want to repair the world, we can turn this world into a paradise. In this third stage, it means we have to extend ourselves. We have to be partners. We have to give priority to life. We have to restudy every action to maximize life and minimize death. That's my interpretation of the book of what halakha is. It's not a set of legal ritual practices. It tells you, look at any life action, study it. You can maximize the life component and minimize the death or pollution component. So the obvious example is eating. If you don't eat, you'll die. So it's a choice of life to eat. But how do you eat? You can maximize life. That's what kashrut is about. Kashrut says, ideally, you should be a vegetarian because you shouldn't live by killing animals, higher animals. Ideally, only, and kashrut says, ideally, you're vegetarians. But in the real world, we need the protein. We allow you to eat meat with restrictions. So kashrut is all about restrictions. And the higher the form of life, the more restrictions. So if you want to eat a fish, the only restriction is species. If you want to eat birds, in addition to choosing only a limited number of species, can't be predatory. You have to use shechita, a swift, painless death, so that the animal will not suffer in death. You want to eat the highest form of life, animal, limited species, all of them are non-predatory, and you have to not only choose the limited species and shechita, swift, painless death, you cannot cook meat and milk together because milk is the source of life and meat is death. So the truth is that's what the Torah tells us. Study every action, speaking, working. You can maximize work to create products that upgrade the world or pollute the world. You can maximize work to give jobs that pay a dignified wage and self-respect, or to force people in an open field to be farm laborers who can't exposed to pesticides that kill them, or ruin their children and their genes, and so on. So literally, that's what the Torah is trying to say. Study every aspect of life. No aspect of life is beyond this. And the point I'm making in the book is that Jews can be a role model. They can be leaders. They can be pace setters. But we need allies. Together, we really can bring the world to this level of paradise that's promised by Messianism.
It's such an affirming vision. It's so inspiring, I think, on a personal level to bring it down to those specific examples of what individuals can do personally, and then also just to have it synthesized as this global view of Judaism.
And again, it starts with the most elementary things: family, having children. It's a choice of life. And if I can't have children, literally, if I don't have the fertility, I can adopt. I can teach and upgrade other people's children. In other words, there's really no area beyond the personal contribution. And that's one of the great themes of the book, too, I feel. To live on the side of life, to create a society that is caring, to create a society. And the Jewish people, this is my argument about the state of Israel. It took power for life, literally, because it understood if we didn't have this power, we'd be wiped out. I feel the Jews have this opportunity to be a role model, not only of looking out for life on their own and for their own people, but also to show everybody else in the world how they can look out for their own. You start saving the world by saving your own family, and then you widen to include everybody. So I see this as this is our moment in history for unparalleled influence. People listen to us. Again, sometimes for the wrong reason. They're obsessed and fascinated to think the Jews control the world. But the flip side of that is that everybody's watching and ready to listen. And if we're ready to rise to greatness, our influence and our role model and our positive influence can be as never before. And that, I think, is the Torah's dream, not to be a tribal religion of an obscure tribe that lives in one small fraction of the Middle East, but a world religion. And I think if we can live up to that, we'll have made a contribution to the world far beyond our own people. But I also think this could be a Renaissance period, a rebirth, renewal of unparalleled influence, excitement, and depth. At least those are some of the themes that I tried to develop in the last chapters of the book.
I'm so grateful for your voice in interpreting Judaism for us and giving us these big picture ideas and instilling in us this idea that we can all participate in our own way. Again, I really, this is just such a gift for me personally to talk to you, and I'm so grateful to have you here. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the 5 books. Our guest today was Rabbi Yitz Greenberg talking about his book, The Triumph of Life, A Narrative Theology of Judaism. You can find a link to the book and all the others we discussed in our show notes. If you've read one of the great books recommended on our show, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a comment on Instagram @5bookspod or in our email, team@5bookspod.org. Also, we have a newsletter. If you'd like an email reminder to keep you up to date with new episodes, plus links to all the books we discussed and some extra goodies directly in your inbox, you can sign up in the show notes or on our website, 5bookspod.org. You can also find transcripts for all episodes there on our website. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Editorial and website support from Amelia Merrill. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Elad Lifshitz of the Dove Abramson Studio. Thanks especially to the Jewish Book Council.